I'm Dr. Hale Pringle, and got COVID right now, so I'm not doing a lot of activity. But I thought I would share some memories of the Gator Band, and one of them's of the FSU Band. Is a story I heard, but it's worth repeating. From 50 some odd years ago. This was after Colonel Bachman was the director, and so these were the Dick Bowles years. And one of his assistant band directors was Bob Foster, and then later Gary Lunsford, which names have become familiar. Reed Poole was the head of the music department. I mean, one of the amusing things to me was I had two aunts, one of whom was Reed Poole's secretary for some years, and I didn't know that until years after I had left Gainesville. And I was at Gainesville working on degrees back and forth for 6 or 7 years. So it was just kind of amusing. Um, Dick Bowles was a trombone player in his musical thing. And both my aunts had perfect pitch, and one of them, Joyce, was taking the music history class, music brass musical instruments course, and moving that slide was just more effort than it was worth. And with perfect pitch, she could do it all with her lips. So she came in to take the little final exam and did the whole thing without moving the slide, and kind of drove Bowles a little bit crazy. Uh, Later, her sister Jean Burrell, and it was a couple of years later, came in to take, and he said, "Burrell, your sister's Joyce. Are you going to do the same thing and not move the slide?" And she says, "Yeah." She says, "You passed. Get out of here." So that was not the Gator Band, but it was amusing memory from way back then. The first story I'm going to do will be an FSU story, just to get it out of the way. I've had several people tell me this at the time, so I'm pretty sure it happened. I wasn't there, obviously. They were playing against Miami, and the theme of the halftime show was a bullfight. So the band was in a circle, and they had two band members wearing one of those costumes that there's two people hunched over, and there's a bull head, and so it looks like four legs, and the bull and the um, drum major was the matador. Well, Miami's mascot is an ibis, a seagull. And the ibis got a wild hair that day and decided that he would go out and mess with the band. So he's out pulling on the bull's tail and running. The matador would have his cape out, and the ibis puts his head down and runs through it. And just in general, wreaking havoc with the halftime show. Well, the one of the dates who was there with Majorette or whomever was a guy, and he collected several cameras from the people who were sitting watching this, who were all band member supporters, again, dates, family members, whatever. And so he goes over and tells the ibis he thought that was super great. He's a reporter for something, and he'd love to do a special on the ibis. So if he'd come to the Fontainebleau Hotel that night with his uniform, then take pictures and write it up, and boy, how great that would be. And the guy who's the ibis agreed. So he got there at the appointed time, and the guy showed him a restroom, and he changed into his costume and came out. Some 250 band members came out of the shadows saying, "We're not real happy with you." Now, nobody heard him, but they left him on top of the fountain, his costume somewhat bedraggled, and of course, I'm sure he was scared half to death. But band said, "We're not happy with you," and he got that message loud and clear. So, okay, moving on. one of my favorite memories is I was the band librarian. Now, Dick Bowles' son was Dan Bowles, who still plays trumpet, um, still a musician. And this is 2024, August, when I'm doing this. And Dan was my best friend, one of my best, and I had been to Dick Bowles' house. We'd been water skiing. He had a little boat, and he liked to go out. And it was one of those unsinkable type. It was full of. He would go out in the ocean and pull the plug, so it had 2 or 3 inches of water, and he'd fish. But they also used that for doing a little bit of water skiing. It wasn't super powerful, but had a good time. And so he knew me fairly well. And so we've come back from a game, and I think it was the FSU game. Got 5 Greyhound buses full of band members. It's 2:30 in the morning. And the band building at that time was an old, big building, but it was clapboard. It was raised on concrete blocks. It was not in very good shape. Of course, it got replaced a few years later with the music building, I think, that they're still using today. But, so we're all milling around, and somebody came through the crowd and said, "Hey, Dr. Bowles is looking for you." So I wound my way through the crowd and got it, and said, "Yes, Dr. Bowles," because I certainly wasn't going to call him Dick Bowles. I never did. And he looks at me and says, "Hale, you're the band librarian, aren't you?" Yeah. And I give you charts to put into the folders. Yeah. And sometimes I give those charts to you right before the building's supposed to close. Yeah. And usually they're in the proper folders the next morning. Whatever. Well, that kind of means you know how to get into this building. Now, I forgot my keys. Campus security can't find their key. Can you get us into this building so we can put our uniforms and things away and people can go home? No punishment, no problem, no issue. Just, can you get us in? Yeah. There were 4 or 5 ways to get into that building, none of which damaged anything. But, doors that if you jiggled them right, the locks came loose or the credit card slipped between the door jamb. And anyway, I got them in, and everybody put their stuff away and went home. And but the hail, the sky is blue, yeah. Grass is green, yeah. Well, later I got called in to read Poole's office, and he said, "Now there's still no problem, but I need to know how you let people in so we can fix that." Like I said, there were 5 or 6 ways. Now, the one that I gave him was not the one we used, but the band library was kind of in a basement, and there were concrete blocks missing, so that I said it was raised on concrete blocks, steps of blocks, and some of the blocks that were supposed to make the room that was the basement totally cut off from this open air underneath there were gone, damaged, just whatever. There was holes, a huge hole from the basement there to underneath the rest of the building where animals could get in, whatever. And we could get underneath the building and come in through that if you were small and a little bit wiry. So that's the one I gave him, and so they fixed the hole, which I was happy. And I continued to use the other ways that we had. So that was a good time. We had a halftime show. In those days, Doc Severson was Al Hurt, Benny Goodman. These were names of the big musicians. Al Hurt and Gibson, Doc Severson were trumpet players. And our halftime show for the Gator Bowl was Doc Severson playing a bunch of solos. So our whole show was the band went out and did concentric half circles. So we were kind of a backdrop, and there's a little podium with a microphone. And the announcer says, "And now, Doc Severson." And nothing happens. And we're all, uh-oh, if something's happened to him, what do we do next? Because there is no halftime show. And so he proceeded, the announcer, to do it again and announce it again. And Doc Severson came out. Seems he'd gone way back underneath the stadium to warm up, and he was far enough back that he didn't hear the announcement the first time. So we did the halftime show, but I remember that sinking feeling we all had of, this is not going to be good. Another one, we played LSU. Now, this was back in the days. The Gators went for almost a century and never won the Southeastern Conference. We'd lose maybe one game every year to LSU or Georgia or Alabama, and we'd be the second or third place in the conference. And it wasn't until the Steve Spurrier years when they finally started to win some Southeastern Conference, and of course some national titles also. But at that time, it was Gators had a real habit of beating people they weren't supposed to and losing to people that they were supposed to clobber. And it's just kind of the way it was. So LSU played in the swamp, and somebody threw a cup of beer on one of the LSU band members as they're leaving the stadium after the game was over. So the next year we're playing in Baton Rouge. Dick Bowles would go up and do the announcement, and so he has to climb through the stadium, up the stairs, up the stairs, up the stairs to get up to the press box, and on his way up, somebody grabs him, stops, and says, "Hey, the word's going out. The crowd's going to get the band after the game." So he goes up, announces the halftime. We did the halftime. When it came time to leave the stadium, the guys were on the outside of the formation with majorette batons or tuba mouthpieces or other things that if you needed a club, we had one. And there were some people who messed with the band, but pretty easy to see who we were because we're all in these bright uniforms. And so when you see one of your friends being ganged up on, it was pretty easy for 4 or 5 people to gang up on the folks who were originally thinking we'll be 3-on-1, and suddenly the odds are the other way. Nobody got hurt. Nothing really happened from it, but I do remember that was a strange formation as we marched out of the LSU. Now, there were a few people who branched off and did a panty raid through one of the dorms, but that's a different story completely. So there are a few of the memories, things that I remember happening back then. I remember, for what it's worth, a few years ago, I was trying to remember the clarinet instructor's name, and his name was Terry. I never called him Terry. Kept trying to remember his last name, and after several months of every now and then thinking, what was his name? Well, Terry wouldn't have been his name. What would have been his full name? It would have been something like Terrence Small. And the name just popped into my head once I did it a full way. But Terry Small, just there was no pathway to that, but Terrence Small. So let me tell you a story or two about the stage band, because he also directed the stage band, which was a Glenn Miller type band, which is 4 trumpets, 4 trombones, 5 saxes, string bass, piano, and whatever. So with one of our gigs was to play for a band directors convention, and I believe it was down in Miami. Now that's a pretty tough crowd. They're all definitely musicians. Hang on. So we played a couple of these and a couple of that, and then we get to there are several of the charts that basically were riffs for some of the players to play a solo. So you get this dom 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 da 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 dom 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 and the trumpet player will play, and the tenor sax will do something similar, and so I was playing the alto sax, and the tenor sax sitting next to me looks at this, says, I never recognized those chords before. So the band's doing this driving, and he stands up and goes, do, 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 do. And Terry shaking, no. Okay. And he went off and played the solo, the improvised solo that the way he was supposed to do, the tenor sax. Well, 4 or 5 pieces later, there's another similar. It's the same basic type of thing. The riff underneath it's different, but it's designed for, again, some of these people to do a solo. Each one would have a round. And when the tenor sax got up, now we're in a different key, and he looks at the band director, and he goes, da, ya, da, and finishes the 8 bar. And then he takes off, and Terry's just shaking his head, and he goes, kind of walks down, and there's some stairs down off the stage, and he sits down and just shakes his head, and the band directors are howling. At that point in time in the band, the drummer, the piano player, and the bass player were about the only people playing. Because all of us who were wind instruments, we would put the mouthpiece to our mouth and then just start to laugh. And you would try and just laugh. You just couldn't. After a while, we got ourselves under control and went back to playing music. But in the meantime, we had it was hysterical at the time. And everybody had a good time with that. Another story from the doing remote concerts. The concert band, which is the marching band in the season when you're not playing football, was doing a tour of the state of Florida and did 8 or 9 different places that we stopped and did concerts. Now, as the band librarian and other things like that, I drove a truck that carried the instruments, and in this case carried all the music stands and some chairs if we needed them. And by the end of the trip, we figured, because one of my friends was also with me, we figured we had done like, I think it was 12 breaking and enterings. Never broke anything, just technically. Never broke anything, but we would get to the place where we're supposed to do the concert, and there's nobody there. And you've got to get in and set things up, get the music stands, make sure that if things need to be moved on the stage, basically get ready for a concert. That means we're out here, and we need to be in there. So we would end up in there and fixing things. And one of the places, it was an old building. And the first piece that we were supposed to play was a German piece called Deflated Mouse. Well, we ran into a little mouse carcass that had totally dried out. So when it came time for Big Bowles comes out, he walks up, he raps on the podium, he looks at us, and he looks down, and he starts to smile. And he looks back up, and he gets ready, and he looks back down, and he finally says, okay, turns around to the audience and says, folks, I'm going to have to take a very short break here, and one of my members with a marked sense of humor thought this would be funny. We're playing Deflated Mouse, and on my podium, and he picks up this tag and a little string, and the tag says, Der Deflated Mouse. And he said, I just can't direct this piece with a deflated mouse on my podium. So he carried the tag very carefully off to the side and put it down someplace, came back, looked at the two of us who were smiling innocently, and we played the concert. I don't think there was anything more ever said about it, but the deflated mouse was amusing. Another time we played the Orange Bowl, and there were two stories on that particular one. Dan and I and another band member, we were part of a little 5-person combo that played for some of the fraternity parties and sorority parties. And we had a gig planned, they were going to pay us to be. And then the Gators were selected for the Orange Bowl, and the band buses was supposed to leave for Miami the same night we were supposed to be playing this for this dance. And we talked to Big Bowles, and he said, well, you don't have to come with the bus as long as you're there the next morning at the field when we get ready to do the rehearsal, because we would be there 2 or 3 days early to put together a halftime show, because you never quite knew who was going to be still available in between terms, because a lot of this would happen near New Year's, and people were at home with their families and whatever. So we played the gig and then jumped in the car and drove the rest of the night. And we're kind of concerned that we're going to get there and be so exhausted that we'll be stumbling all over our feet where everybody else is doing a rehearsal. And we pulled into the right place. And a few minutes later, the buses pulled up. And as we watched people getting off the bus, people who had partied awfully hardy the night before, we realized, as tired as we were still probably going to be among the most functional for that particular day, because there were a lot of people wearing sunglasses early in the morning and having trouble navigating the steps to the band bus. Now, in a similar trip, driving that truck with all the instruments in it, we came up, and we felt good when we left Miami. By the time we got near Gainesville, a whole week of rehearsing and partying and the game and the excitement of the game, we were getting pretty tired. And there is a truck weigh station just around Ocala. And we pulled in to be weighed, knowing that we were way under. And it's drizzling rain. And we look in the window, and there's the highway patrolman, and he looks down at his meters and waves us on. Well, right next to my left ear is a pole with a big speaker on it, which none of us had particularly paid any attention to. And as I rev up the engine and start to let the clutch out, this huge booming voice says, "Hey, you, stop!" And it's like, and we're all just jam on the brakes, and the guy comes running out in the rain, and we're all, what the heck is going on? What did we do wrong? I mean, we're, and he jumps up on the running board, and I'm rolling the window down, and he says, is the buses with the band, with the Gator team coming up this way? We want to stop them and congratulate them. And we said, as far as we know, they will be, and we think it's later today, but we're not really sure. We're not that associated, we didn't have the inside word on the team. We knew about the Gator Band, but not the team. So at that point, he says, "Okay, have a good day." And we're kind of saying, well, let's go change our shorts and finish the strip. Because that "Hey You" stopped with the huge booming loud, because it needed to be louder than the big 18-wheeler engines and whatever. Really woke us up that time. So there are some stories, and there are others, and I may add them to the end of this, but there's some things that happened. This was in the late 60s, early 70s. I looked when I finally graduated and realized that a senior recital and one more course, and I could have had a music degree, because I had taken those courses as electives for fun over the course of the several degrees that I got from Gainesville over a period of time. So hope you guys enjoyed a little of this. You have a great day. Oh, Hale, yes. And here are a couple more. We'll start with a couple with the big bass drum. Colonel Bachman ordered a bass drum. The dimensions he gave them was the maximum it can be and still get through a standard door. So this was called the biggest boom in Dixie, and it's still being used. And it had its own carriage that it sat on, because this was definitely too big for somebody to carry by a long shot. Now, one of the stories was 3 years before I was a Gator Band member, which was in '63, started. They were playing Miami. Strapped to the bottom of the bass drum, unbeknownst to the band directors and whatever, was about a 3-foot gator. And during the halftime show, the guys pulling the cart pulled a couple ropes, and little gator dropped onto the field, and the band left. And the Miami drum major starts to strut out onto the field and sees this little gator and decides that they're not going out on that field. The U-turn and goes back, and one of the smaller female band members goes running out, picks the gator up and pets it on the head and runs back into the crowd. Crowd thought that was hilarious. This thing was was too small. I mean, you don't want to put your hand in its mouth, but it was too small to be really dangerous. During my years, my parents had gotten me a little convertible, and it was an English Ford, and it wasn't a whole lot of car, but it was very cool to have a convertible. Never did it. Somebody wrote at that time, which I totally agreed with, why the Italians, where it was always sunny, specialized in hardtop convertibles, and the English, where it's always raining and dreary, specialized in ragtops. Because this little car, if it was raining, the roof was such that if you open the window, it would drip on your leg. If you left the window up and turned on the fan, only way to get it on was to attach to the heater. So it can be 95 degrees outside and raining, and your choices are to get cooked or wet. Anyway, we used this little car to move some of the big instruments, including we would attach the little carriage, the big bass drum, and move it from the band building to the stadium on the days of the game. It was a trailer. And we would drive behind the stadium and down to a place where I could park. Well, there was a policeman up at the top to block people off from going down there if they weren't authorized. And we never were officially authorized, but we're all in band uniforms, pulling band instruments, and so we never got hassled. Well, in the back seat of my car every game, there was an ice chest, and you could see the tops of six-packs, Cokes, Pepsis, whatever, and he checked them several weeks and then stopped checking them. And so one day we pull up. He's a part-time minister and part-time police officer. And he says, well, I presume that those are Cokes back there again today. I'm not going to lie to you, officer. This time it's beer. He says, sure it is. Reached back, pulled one out, popped the top, handed it to him, and drove off. And we're kind of watching in the rearview mirror, and he's standing there with this foaming can, and he looks around, and it's blazing hot. He runs over, sits on the front side of his car, and gets rid of the evidence for us. But it was just kind of amusing to see him go through what am I going to do now? I have this beer in my hand, and I think I'll drink the beer. So that was two stories with the big bass drum. Another interesting story, for couple of years, I lived in a little garage apartment, and there was a whole group of us who would leave the band rehearsals and go play bridge. And we'd grab something like cans of chili or whatever on the way to warm up, and so we would eat dinner while we're playing bridge. And Bernard Mackey, who's one of my friends, played a baritone and was excellent at it. He always bought orange juice, and he would shake it up and open it up and drink it. Well, this one day, wherever we stopped didn't have the orange juice in the little cardboard, so we ended up with a Coke or a Pepsi, I don't remember which. And we deal the hand, and he picks up his hand and looks at it, and you can see his eyebrows raised a little, and he puts it down. And he picks up his can and shakes it real good and sets it down, and he pointed right toward me as he's starting to pop, and I'm reaching out, and then he stops, turns it around, and kind of pointed toward him, and then does he know what he? By that time, it was too late because he popped the top and it drenched him, and he suddenly became aware that he was not drinking orange juice today, as he got a face full of foaming Coca-Cola. And again, we all good time was had. Everybody was laughing. And let's see, there was one other I was thinking about when I was doing this. Pause for a second while I remember what it was. Okay, I remember them. There were two instances. One day we are rehearsing. The concert band is, and Nick Bowles is directing this piece, and suddenly he stops and he turns around and says, "Clarinets, I know there are a lot of black on that page," meaning there are a whole lot of notes. He says, "Don't involve me in your problems." Now, from the top, 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, how are we supposed to do that? Because we're all struggling trying to. It was the first time we'd seen the piece, and there were a lot of notes. But it was like, don't involve you in our problem. I don't know how we're going to do that. Another time that was kind of interesting, he had a gadget. It was a series, it was a tube. There were a series of lights, and you could adjust it to, as you played louder, it would light up, higher and higher and higher. So he said, I want to make a point. So there's 200 plus of us in this room. And he says, now I want to play a C chord as loud as you can. So we're playing, and he reaches and dials the thing down to where it's just barely flickering. And see, it's just, and he stops us, and he turns around to the drummers and says, give me a paradiddle, and we get a rap, and the thing lights up all the way to the top. It says, so one drummer in pure raw sound is louder than all the rest of you. And today's rock and roll bands, they have to amplify the drums so they can be heard. Otherwise, these guitars have been amplified so much that the drummers get lost unless they're amplified, which gave you an idea of just how loud some of the concerts were. Oh, anyway, that I think I'll stop on that. But those are some things from the late 60s, and I think 70, 71 was the last time I played in the band. When I finally got my last degree was the first time that I wore a robe, because I always stayed with the band rather than wearing the cap and gown and whatever. So anyway, you guys have a great day. Oh, Hale, yes.